Joining us right now to discuss, distinguished professor, University professor Thane Rosenbaum, and trial attorney Barak Lurie. Thane, I'll start with you. What gets your attention? What do you think could be the most? I got to tell you, I look at the affirmative action case. This is someone who's Asian, has incredible, what do they have, like a 4.6 GPA,
yes,
and like an SAT of 1650 or something, and didn't get in to some of to Harvard, including, I think, a couple other top schools.
So, Bob, first of all, I think Katrina should step aside. She went to Harvard. It's not fair.
Exactly.
It's not fair to her to be sitting. She needs to recuse herself. So, Katrina knows that Harvard, all the hockey players had a crush on her. But she also knows...
I was a big hockey fan, Thane. I'm not going to lie.
I was just going to say, the hockey players get a preference. Harvard believes that all kinds of categories of people create a diverse student body. But what the Supreme Court is saying here is that race can't be a factor. If you're truly colorblind, you can have all kinds of others, violinists, hockey players, even the families of legacies. But they're saying if you really believe in color blindness, the best way not to discriminate on the basis of race is not to discriminate on the basis of race. And that's exactly what Chinese Americans are saying. They're saying, you have downgraded us, and we have been discriminated against because you're favoring one race over another.
Because they're overperforming in a lot of cases. I say they're performing well. And they certainly meet all the standards to get in. And so, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but there's something that was a little embarrassing to Harvard. Sorry, Katrina.
That's okay.
That when it came to Asians, they also created a category, Bob, that was like a personality test. And they absolutely graded Asian Americans lower on personality. And so because they wanted to come to a final number that they can justify. And when that came out in discovery, you can imagine what Asian Americans thought. So again, it was really getting to the heart. The Supreme Court is saying, we don't have any problem with diversity. I think it's a good thing. We just think affirmative action should come to an end and racial preferences should be stopped.
Wow. Barak, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, what's fascinating about affirmative action is that it really was supposed to be just a very short-term program back in 1964. And then it just kept on going because they figured they haven't fixed the so-called problem. And so that is the big issue there in my mind. And then the issue of diversity, that they want to have diversity. Well, okay, that's great, but it's not constitutional the way they're at least implementing it. So that's the big issue there. So there's a lot of things that we want, but there's a problem. There's a constitution. So like Thane was saying, you can look at many different factors. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you can't look at somebody's athletic ability, his academic prowess, his ability to play chess or otherwise. I mean, frankly, I'm fine with a university. I went to Stanford. There were a lot of Asians at Stanford at the time. But if it was 99% Asian, okay, so be it. Make it merit-based entirely. Or, for that matter, just these other interesting things like scholarships, not scholarships, but athletic abilities in computers, some sort of other incredible things that they've done extracurricularly. These are the things that need to be considered.
Yeah, and I've got to throw out there, okay, I went to Virginia, okay? I got a baseball scholarship. I was accepted before the baseball season, so even before. So I'm proud of that. And you know what? I worked hard. I felt like I was qualified to get in there. But during most of my life, there have been affirmative action programs. And here's the trick, Thane, isn't it? Affirmative action is discrimination. It's justified because there was previous discrimination against people of color especially. So anytime you have, you take race into account, you're verging on a different kind or a form of discrimination. But most schools say, well, we have it as part of the evaluation.
Right, but that's exactly what Harvard and North Carolina said. We take a full range, the holistic approach to admissions, and it just so happens that skin color, when it comes to minorities, should be a factor to redress past histories of discrimination. But it's true, we're talking about 60 years of affirmative action programs.
Is that what this is about then? Is this about, okay, it's been long enough? Because the way things are right now, everything seems to be race, race, race again.
At the oral argument, Bob, Justice Thomas, who is African American, he literally said that. He was talking about it's been on at some point, I can't remember if it was him or Alito, literally like threw their hands up and said, when is this going to stop? And it was like it was a shocking moment, right? He said, when is this going to ever end?
Right, and Barack, it was to your point, though, that it was supposed to be temporary in the first place.
That's right. I mean, look, it was always, to my mind, it was always racist in the first place to have affirmative action. It's always bad for everybody. There are too many people that had nothing to do with slavery in the past, people who've lived here, people who've moved from different countries, like my family did. We moved from a different country. We had no connection whatsoever with slavery in our past. And why should our family be prejudiced because of that? So it was always racist from the very beginning. But then there's a secondary question. Is it working? Is affirmative action working after 60 years? And I put it to you that it's not been working. It only creates, unfortunately, lower standards. There are other reasons why there is racism, but I don't think you have to force colleges to fix that racism. It should not be the onus on these colleges.
Okay,
that's the big problem there.
Before we go, very quickly, a lot of people wonder about redistricting. How do you think that'll come out, Thane?
So remember, this case goes even further back, right back to the election. Just to remind you, right before the election, Justice Alito, the Supreme Court, received an emergency petition from Pennsylvania. You know what the issue was? That state election laws were changed in a number of battleground states by election officials and by judges, and not by state legislatures. But guess what, Bob? The Supreme Court says it can only be time, place, and manner of elections can only be established by state legislatures. So when that case was brought up, Justice Alito said, essentially, this is going to blow up in our face. And so people who question the 2020 election, many of them say the real problem was, in light of the pandemic, the election laws were changed not by state legislators, but by savvy Democrats, either in courtrooms or in state election offices. And so the question is, were they allowed to do that? Were they allowed to change the election laws? And this case is based on the independent state legislature theory, which is to say, is it actually the case that federal elections can only be established by state legislatures? You cannot change it through courts or through state election officials. So this issue goes beyond North Carolina. I would argue it goes to all the battleground states.
All right. Final words, Barack.
Well, I agree with Thane completely. What's interesting about this is the net effect. I mean, they'll have to look back on some of these electioneering issues that happened with these not these legislatures that otherwise interfered, and the governor that decided what they wanted to do in Pennsylvania, for example. So what happens then? I mean, are they going to undo that if they found something unconstitutional that way? Yeah. So they really have their hands tied that way.
Yeah. All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Barack and Thane, thank you.
Thank you.